Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second and last debate of the UBIE Athens Academy, a three-day event focusing on raising awareness about unconditional basic income in Europe, held here in Athens at the wonderful space of Pantheon University. And this debate will be focusing more on pilots on a local level and social policies in relation or in contradiction to basic income on a local level. So for that, we have some amazing speakers with us. We have the mayor of the municipality of Neapolis-Sykeon, Mr. Symeon Daniilidis. Thessaloniki. It's the second largest city in Greece, so that's important to clarify. So welcome. We have Angelina Kussy, who is a research fellow in the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and she's also an activist in Barcelona en Comú. Welcome, Angelina. And last but not least, we have Jonny Douglas from the UBI Lab Network that has successfully run several campaigns towards mayors supporting basic income in the UK and kind of globally. So I'm excited for this debate. I hope everyone is excited as well. Reminder for the audience here, if you will need a headset to listen to the live interpretation, to go get one last minute. And a reminder to the audience listening to us online that you can always use the comments on YouTube or Facebook Live to ask your questions, and then the questions will be asked to the speakers. Without further ado, let's begin. So each of our speakers will give some key insights that will drive the conversation further. Let's start with Mr. Symeon Daniilidis.
Ευχαριστώ, Αντώνη. Καταρχήν.
Thank you, Andonis. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Demoulas and all his team
Ένωση Δήμων Ελλάδα
for inviting us, for inviting Dimitris Papastergiou also, who is the mayor of Trikila. So based on the decision of KETE, I was appointed as president of the social policy of the Central Union of Municipalities in Greece to come here in this nice location, and I have very good memories from this place. Just like I have a very positive impression from the work that is done here at the Pantheon University on social issues. Ever since I was a student, I believed that the modern progressive university must have a daily contact with the local society, with local authorities and self-administration, all the stakeholders in society. So it is nice, it's very important to recognize self-administration as a body that exerts social policy. This is, of course, recognized across Europe, but not yet in Greece. This recognition is well-deserved everywhere, and this is something that has been accomplished and conquered in Europe, but not yet in Greece. So we wanted that title, having against us a state, a public sector, which was against us. When after the World War, the local authorities had exclusive competencies because they were closer to the citizens. In our country, we experienced the Civil War. And after the Civil War, we had a regime that denied. It was state-driven and very centralist, and it denied to delegate competencies and powers to the local authorities. Even today, after the decentralization that took place in 2010, the so-called Kallikratis law, the state still keeps most competencies. And based on subsidiarity, these powers are established by the European Constitution on self-administration, the ECTA, that is the European Charter of Local Autonomy. Based on this charter, which is the Constitution of Europe for local authorities, all social policies, all social welfare, all social health must be a competence of the local authorities. Unfortunately, self-administration must strive and claim what should be what is self-evident. So in the last decades, with the financial crisis that affected Greece and onwards, the role of the local authorities in planning and exercising social policies has become very essential. There was a deficit and a very poorly effective social state. And the local authorities took on the roles and it did so at a reduced cost. So it proved to the central state that when then these policies are exercised by the local authorities, the cost is even lower. But of course, we managed to do many things. We mobilized the citizens, and also the local authorities applied social programs. It shaped new social policies. It maintains its social cohesion at a local level. Many times I say that if we didn't have 4,500 social welfare structures in the local authorities in the period of the memorandum and the pandemic, we would live in a jungle in our country. So in a period in which Greece was affected by the austerity and the financial crisis, the state could not support the vulnerable groups of the population. During those periods, we saw many people being angry and very sad, and many of the rights of the citizens that had been conquered in the past were now being breached. Unemployment affected many groups of the population, and there was a social insecurity across the population. And also the central state could not realize the consequences of the financial crisis. So what we did was very important back then, we as local authorities. So we spread the wide range of the social policies that aimed at ensuring social cohesion. And we did that in an environment of financial restrictions and constraints, and the very important cuts of without the support of the state. And many times the country was against us. So we managed to do this using our own resources, very often having to reduce other functions in order to keep the society going. The self-administration was ready already because it had experience and knowledge. It boasted the network of different social services. So all the experience that we had been building thanks to the European projects became the fertile ground which allowed the local administration to show its sense of responsibility and efficiency. Thanks to mature and effective policies, the local administration in our country managed to establish its position as the main pillar of social policy. The health crisis of the 2 last years and the participation of the municipalities in fighting against its impact confirmed what we're saying. The local administration exercises a wide range of policies and claims even more. It claims the institutionalization of all these policies. So it wishes to transfer, its desire is to obtain exclusive competencies which will be accompanied by the respective financial resources as provided for by the Constitution. And unfortunately, the state is the first one to violate this Constitution. And when we discuss about a breakthrough interventions such as the basic income, the respective competencies have not been delegated to the public administration. And of course, the same for the resources. The local administration in our country in the last years, due to the financial crisis and due to the tragic effects of the pandemic, had to bear the weight of thousands of families and to provide through the social structures the services, essential services to the groups of the vulnerable groups of population. Today, the municipalities and the social enterprises run these 4,500 structures and address to the whole population and provide respective services. And in most cases, if not always, they provide the services for free. Some of these successful structures are the 1,000 projects of help at home, 4,000 kindergartens, 450 centers of creative occupation for disabled people and for people that are not disabled, the centers for the disabled, day centers for the disabled, centers for the Roma population, hundreds of centers to support vulnerable groups of people, 350 centers, community centers, implementation of food systems, that is a provision of lunch and dinners to vulnerable families, programs, capacity building for vulnerable groups of people, social supermarkets and pharmacies and primary care services, hundreds of municipal medical centers which provide to hundreds and thousands of people primary health care, the 75 prevention centers from drugs, hundreds of projects for the hospitality of the refugees. And we're very proud of this because all these programs for the refugees from the Middle East and the war from Syria were embraced and were run by the self-administration, the local administration. And we cope with millions of refugees that transited our country to go to the north of Europe. At the same time, we provide social work. We support the local authority. We provide organized and experienced services and public utility services. We develop social cooperation networks, making use of the volunteers that support with their participation initiatives of the municipality and the society. We also run funded programs, subsidized programs for vulnerable groups of population, etc. Fighting against poverty through the establishment, the reinforcement of social structures is a top priority for local administration. We already have an experience in the operation of social structures against poverty, and the social structures, the social supermarkets, the social pharmacies, etc., were developed through the human resource business operational projects in the period 2007-2013. They continued with the 2014-2020, and we hope that they will continue to be implemented in the forthcoming programming period until 2027. So these centers, we also have the centers for the Roma and the vulnerable groups of population, and a new social welfare system was established and providing holistic support to the citizens through the provision of full range of services that aims at combating social exclusion and discriminations. Through these social structures, we implement targeted interventions for target groups that will allow us to fight against the discriminations and the social exclusion that threatens many thousands of people across the country. There is a wide range of interventions that aims at promoting equal treatments. Our interventions aim at giving access to basic foodstuff and fighting against the social exclusion due to poverty, social welfare of vulnerable groups of population, providing daily lunch and dinner for those who cannot afford to buy food on a daily basis. And also support to assistance to the provision of full access to medical services and provision of consulting services and psychomotor services to children and elderly. And also we have structures for the homeless that are affected by the financial crisis, and also those who have mental health issues, because these people are usually long-term unemployed or drug users, people without family, without accommodation, without food. So the main and the only assistance provided to these people is provided by the local administration. We think that we should continue and extend the use and operation of such structures because they prove to be very useful in fighting against poverty. Also, we need to reinforce all other structures interventions undertaken by the local administration, which are directly or indirectly aiming at fighting against poverty. Some of them are the following. Indicatively, of course. The municipal medicine, the primary healthcare, We have stressed many times since more than 10 years, and we've tried to reinforce them in order to ensure that that what happens in the civilized countries of Europe to take place here, that is a primary health care. We have proven through studies that this competence manages to improve the quality of the services provided and extending its application, both qualitative, both in terms of quality and quantity. And also there will be cost saving for the social security system. Also, we wanted to provide other support systems for women who are victims of sexual abuse. This has proved to be a major issue in our country. I'm talking about abuse of women and children. So sexual abuse, rape, etc. Also, we want to provide access to basic accommodation and food, and we claim to ensure that the role of the self-administration will be critical in entrepreneurship matters. All over Europe, the recording of the unemployed and their integration into the market are matters within the competence of the local authorities. And these unemployed people in these European countries manage to join the market very soon. Unfortunately, this is not the case in Greece, where things in this field advance very slowly. And we have a poor results when it comes to their integration into the labor market. Also, we want to provide housing systems for the refugees, and we have proven to Europe, and we have been congratulated by the UN that for having taught all over Europe our humanitarian approach towards the refugees, and we provided care to them, and the United Nations Commissioner asks other countries to come to Greece and see the practices applied, the best practices applied in Greece on the matter of the social integration of the refugees. The local administration recently claims a very important role in the housing policy in order to have the possibility, which does exist in Europe, to support homeless young couples or citizens who wish to have families but do not dare to because they do not have a permanent house. So we're now trying to determine the role of the local administration for the social housing policy. As regards the basic income policy, which of course is our topic today, and I'd like once again to congratulate and thank Mr. Daniilidis and his team, and of course Pandion University, because once again, they pave the way for this fight and for this procedure together with actors from Europe and the United States. So therefore, we need through this conference to make a link with local administration and with the social groups, which are potential beneficiaries of the basic income. So we do understand that the basic income is paid by a community to all its members on an individual basis without financial criteria or employment conditions. It is a universal provision to all citizens, and it is the minimum provision that the local authority or the state must provide to all citizens, and it aims at combating, fighting against poverty and allowing socially excluded people. Of course, this has some fervent supporters who think that this solution for the redistribution of wealth, but we also have some people who are criticizing because they are not convinced about the benefits of the solution. So we are here to discuss and answer them. So we need to see who will the beneficiaries be and whether there will be differences compared to the current income, or what will be the criteria. Of course, all these questions are reasonable because this universal income may be provided to people with high income who do not need it. Anyway, in any case, the citizens with low income profit from them because they will not fund it through their tax payment, just as it is the case with the more wealthy. Another argument by the researchers is that this will reduce inequalities and will shorten the gap between the wealthy and the poor. However, an issue that needs to be answered is how this cost will be covered. In order to cover this cost of regarding the provision of universal income to all citizens, it is proposed to save resources from social policies implemented by the municipalities. Of course, we do not agree with this because we think that the interventions of the social services, programs, and structures of the local administration is very well targeted and effective, and they do not only aim at increasing the income of the vulnerable groups, but supporting them in general. The overall resources to the local to the social structures of the local administration cannot cover the basic income. Most of the programs that we implement as a local administration come from the funding of resources of the National Strategic Reference Framework. We therefore believe that the basic income cannot replace the social structures, even though it will definitely upgrade the place in which vulnerable groups of population are found in. Lifting the social exclusion of many peoples that live under the poverty threshold also included education, consulting, psychological support, and other measures in order to achieve, recover, and achieve their equal integration into the labor market. The increase of the income will not solve problems related to lack of skills and poor mental health and difficulty in digital services skills. Therefore, the aim, the objective is to have a holistic combination, a set of measures, actions, structures, to increase revenue that will contribute to reducing poverty through the parallel support of all vulnerable social groups in order for them to have equal treatment to services and social assets. What is also critical is whether the provision of the universal income will be a counter incentive for people not to find a job. I say that because we have such examples with the social solidarity allowance. What I mean by that is that some vulnerable members of the population have been social excluded, and they do no longer try to join the labor market and the society. The supporters of the basic income theory believe that this income can push people to get and find a more effective job, but these people need further training, psychological support, and then they need to be empowered in order to make radical changes in their life and increase their skills. These actions can be achieved only under specific conditions, with the help of the social workers, psychologists, business consultants. Given that the local administration does not have the competence, the resources to provide support to the citizens of each region, we do not have currently a way to see what the benefits or the disadvantages of implementing such a measure. Of course, with civil society, the scientists, and the state, and the European institutions, we must continue this effort to ensure, to secure the resources and establish the conditions in order to move to this direction. Being in favor of the support of the socially vulnerable and the effort to combat poverty, we are in favor of implementing a pilot program that will be designed by experts, and it will be adapted into the Greek reality in some urban, semi-urban, rural, and other regions. And this design will take into account the local specificities and the special needs of these vulnerable groups in every region of the country, in order to make sure that after an integrated and scientifically documented preparation, we will have a 2 or 3 year pilot implementation led by the local administration, which will have a pioneer role. And after this pilot implementation of these 2 or 3 years, and after assessing the results that will come out, and after having secured the universalization, that is a universal implementation across the country, we will be able to make the big leap that will bring about a big change in the country in all respects. We believe in this, and we will join our forces in this regard, hoping that we will soon have the positive results. Thank you, and I apologize for taking more time than predicted.
From your elaborate speech, I can reiterate on the points from personal experience as well that municipalities have been drivers of social change and primary caretakers of citizens under sometimes the most difficult conditions. So it's wonderful to hear real life examples with detailed numbers from Greece. I can argue that these examples expand way beyond Greece, and municipalities are the primary caretakers of the citizens, I would say globally. I'm also very happy to hear that you're very, very much in favor of a pilot as long as it's a well-studied one of basic income, because that is the main point that we wanted to focus today on our discussion. So let's discuss that. And for that reason, I'm going to pass the torch to Angelina, who will give, you need to press it once more, who will give some practical examples from Barcelona. So let's hear you if we can. Not yet.
Wow. Okay. First of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for all the organizational work that have been done here. And thank you very much, Mayor, for all the list of social policies and your reflections. I actually will not share the practical examples from Barcelona. I will rather, I see this debate, this panel, as a continuation of the debate on the important project, which is to think about the universal basic income in the cities and towns and villages and from the cities. Why it is important? First of all, as you said, the cities are like right now we can see that the main actors taking care of the people. Both in fact they are just doing that, but they are just like the places with the best potential to do so. This idea, this project is more and more present in both places. Like I mean, this idea of thinking by the universal basic income from the cities is present or important for both movements. Like from one point of view, the networks of the advocating for the universal basic income, and from the other point of view, for the global municipalist movement. What is the global municipalist movement? First of all, in short, it's like a global movement of place-based radical movements which advocate and work and implement, sometimes they are in the governments, progressive policies and work for a feminist, ecological society. But like the most important thing is that they work also for, they are concerned with the question how we do the social policies and how we do politics. So they work for direct democracy and try to implement different mechanisms of this kind of political action. Before I will, I wanted to say why, in my opinion, it's important to think those, like to link the objectives of both movements together. First of all, I remember when we were some activists advocating for the universal basic income in Spain, and there were some people on the left were telling us that we lack a political vision, that we don't have a political vision, right? And from the other point of view, the municipalist movement clearly has a very strong political horizon and political vision, but sometimes we can say that we lack, we as citizens, we lack material tools, actually conditions to participate and to implement this vision. So I wanted to remind that social policies are not only tools to cover the necessities of vulnerable groups or to fight against poverty, even, of course, they are important tools of doing that, but they are like There are also a political technology. There are tools of social engineering. They are instruments of governance, and there are always some values, some political aims behind them. And also they have like the great possibility to envision something, to envision the future, basically. So the question about the universal basic income and the cities is actually the question about what kind of society we want to build, merging those two things, right? So those of us who are convinced about linking those two things, we agree that we want to see a society where the care is in the center, for example, right? We live in times of the strong care crisis, and we want to change the priorities. We want to see the municipality as a basic political community instead of the nation state. This is a radical vision, and it's of course a long-term vision, but this is the political project, right? So the social policies can be used to change the way of doing the politics in general, not just, as I said before, to cover needs of vulnerable groups. And the direct democracy, the citizens politically active who have like guaranteed this right to actually participate in the design of those policies. This is also like a part of that vision or that horizon. Yeah, I think that there couldn't exist like a better place to talk about the things like Athens. And things like phenomena like the care crisis actually are creating right now this kind of stratified reproduction that we could observe in the classical polis, right? This kind of stratified reproduction when some people are actually like participating or doing their life and have covered their needs, and other people are like working for them to cover their needs without having their own needs covered, right? So the universal basic income reminds us about this radical vision from one point of view that we need and we want as human beings to participate in the politics, but about like also the idea that it can be based on inequalities when someone can do that and some other people just lack material conditions to do that, right? And in this vision also, because it was mentioned here that it's important to assist people, help people to adapt to the labor market. So in this vision also is important the idea of not only or not adapting actually people to the market, right? But creating like alternative space which is not commodified, alternative space which is like a circuit when there is place for a reflection about what we want to work on actually, and where there are like citizens also who have the voice about this, and not only like the market and the actors who are stronger on this market. So it's like a vision which is not like for the consumption and for the production, but I will not actually extend about this part because this is the Academy of the Universal Basic Income. So this kind of ideas for which, for what the Universal Basic Income could be useful are general for the idea of the Universal Basic Income. Yeah, so probably were very well discussed during this academy. So I will go on to some ideas what others policies will not do on the local level. And so why the universal basic income in the city is an important social policy, right? For sure, like other social policies will not liberate time of some part of the citizens of the city, which are willing to work actually towards this horizon. Someone must fight for it, and it's right now the situation is that many activists like literally can't work for this, to approach this horizon. Other social policies will not change the paradigm of political participation. will not involve citizens in designing policies, will not make them feel more like political subjects before being workers. So they don't have the potential to radicalize democracy. They have, they can be more generous or less generous, but don't have this potential that the universal basic income has in this sense. And either will break up with this paternalistic, controlling attitude toward people in need, assistentialism, and will not reduce spending on bureaucracy related to this control, and will not liberate time of social workers to actually do their work. We know that many social workers do say that actually most of their time, instead of helping people or being like doing the social work, they are doing bureaucracy for them in order to make them be eligible for social aids, right? And other social policies will also not, like, they don't have this potential to, some of them have, of course, but the basic income would be very important tool to create local ties and activities. Community which can cherish and not like the citizens would not have to fight basically for survive. And it's of course the matter of social justice, about valuing all that work which is not within the market. And as I said before, creating this space which is not commodified and is alternative to the capitalist market. And this, yeah, like as many people say, like cities don't have prerogatives, actually competence to implement, to fund something so big like the basic income. But as the present here, Julio Linares, said in one debate, and I'm drawing on it, it's worth to think about it in relation to the other tool, which is the alternative currency. And together with Gabriela Cabaña, they have an important text about it, not about that in the cities, but about the alternative currencies and the universal basic income. This solution of doing it through alternative currencies would be possible, will like bring another political possibilities, actually, more benefits, let's say. Will, first of all, like when we implement many social policies, social transfers to vulnerable people, for example, we find very often ourselves in a situation that they spend this money, for example, in, I don't know, buying on Amazon or in Carrefour. So this money is all like going out of the city or of the place, right? Social, like currencies are like maintaining the money, the capital in the place, which is not only important because it is important to maintain it, but it's also important because it creates a network, local network of small shops, petty producers, small farmers, protects craft people, and so on and so on. So it creates like social cohesion and ties which are territorialized and yeah. And why in the cities? Because many mayors also say, okay, I support the idea, but let's wait until the states will implement it. Well, first of all, and the most important thing is that it's quite difficult to convince states to do so, not only because of the political landscape, the current political landscape, but because states are based on the logic, which will not allow for decommodification of some part of the social life. And why the cities? Because this kind of solution create actually this community, this alternative community that we want to see in longer term, based on more on cities than on nation states. That would also give a greater autonomy than the implementation from the other level. Yeah, like many cities right now are basically implementing policies which are thought in Brussels or in national governments. But this way they would have like more greater control on their own resources. From the other point of view, this idea also appeared in some of the debate on the same topic, that would be also possible to collaborate in some way with the European level. That then we would also be able to create like a Europe of cities instead of Europe of competing nation states. And the last thing, the most, like I already mentioned that, but it would allow for that localization, anchor the economy and in the territory. And I think I will like leave these bullet points here and let's start the debate later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's another round of very, very useful and very driving insights for the next part of the conversation. So we saw clearly from both sources of insights and inspiration that municipalities can be leaders in social cohesion, and that is quite reasonable if you think of municipalities as communities. It's easier to connect with people that are near you rather than people on a national level, for example. That makes it, the larger a nation is, the more difficult it is to connect both with the citizens as well as with the political leadership. So we see that municipalities can be fundamental for social cohesion, and we see the links of unconditional basic income towards the same purpose. So combining the two makes perfect sense in my mind. And we can see how you can perhaps motivate more communities or political leaders on a local level to start thinking in that direction, right, Jonny? Because Jonny Douglas has been, through the UBI Lab Network, has been doing exactly that kind of campaigning very successfully. So let's hear from that.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here this evening. So I'm not an academic. I'm not a politician. I don't work in policy. So when I was asked to be on this panel about what UBI could mean for social policy, I started thinking it in the terms that I understand it. So social policy is about how we reform society, right? And how we reform society is by improving things for people. And the reason that I'm an advocate of basic income foremost is that I think that there's one thing that we can all agree on, regardless of politically how we lean. And that is that we're not at the pinnacle of human evolution right now. And there's a lot of things that we're not doing particularly well and could do with drastically improving. And the issue with those things is, as the mayor was describing, is that so many of them are such complicated problems that are interlinked in so many different ways, they can almost seem impossible to try and overcome. And I'm not suggesting for a second, and I'm sure none of the advocates of UBI would do that UBI is a panacea or some sort of silver bullets that's going to solve all of these problems. But to quote Alexander Dehenger, when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which the flower grows, not the flower. And for all of these interventions that we try to make, if we don't have the foundations in order for people to be able to flourish once those interventions have been made, we will endlessly spend money and resources in time trying to fix things that will never become fixed, because there never becomes a crossover point of any sustainability, of any continuation of someone having an intervention or being helped, and then continue to be able to help themselves or help the people around them or engage with their community, because there's nowhere for them to build from. And that's what, for me, universal basic income has the potential to provide, is this economic security that means that we don't have to fix things for people. We don't have to fix people's problems, because we're giving them the opportunity by creating the conditions for them to be involved in co-creating the solutions to solve those problems in a way that means that they are fixed, and then we move on to fixing the next thing. We don't keep coming back around having to fix and try and solve the same problems over and over again. It also provides the opportunity to do something that I personally feel we tell ourselves as this myth about the need for us to suffer or make great sacrifice in order to do great things or produce great things or change things, whether that's from art perspective or enterprise or startup or however we want to regenerate and rejuvenate and change the things that we do. And the fact is that that is often the case when you see an artist struggle or a musician kind of live in a kind of really hardship in order to be able to spend the time to learn the skills. But the vast majority of people do not exist in a world where they can sacrifice, because what they have to sacrifice or would have to sacrifice to make that choice is their children or their loved ones, or choosing not to put food on the table for them. And therefore, they're not even in a position to make that choice, let alone have that opportunity. So we're sitting on this incredible kind of latent energy and potential of human talent, because there's so many people that have so much to offer that aren't in a position to sacrifice anything, because they're providing for others, they're caring for others. And if we were able to find the means where people didn't have to make sacrifice in order to better engage with society and create things that might help all of us and benefit all of us, whether they have a commercial or commoditized output, or whether there's a lot of the things that we've seen arise in the pandemic that have nothing to do with commerce and have nothing to do with the commoditization of stuff. It's just the things that we really need in order to survive every day. And they don't often have a monetary value. They have so much more meaning to that. If the more people we can provide the opportunity to be in that space, the better the world is definitely going to be. And that is about providing the opportunity and creating the conditions to reduce stress, to reduce anxiety, to give people the headspace to think more than the next day and where the next bit of money is going to come from in order to pay the bills or put food on the table. And in building that up over time, we provide the opportunities for people to think 2 weeks ahead or a month ahead or a year ahead, and start to make those plans that allow them to change their lives onto a different track, or create the opportunities that make their lives, their families' lives, their communities better. But unless they have that financial security, unless they have that base layer upon which they can start to think in that way, none of those interventions that are implemented on a town, city, municipal, regional, or even national level will ever be sustainable, and will never get the most benefit out of that time, money, and resource that is being spent. And the only way we can do that, as has been mentioned, is that that's never going to happen at a national scale. And change does not happen from the top down at a national scale. I can't think of any example where that's ever happened. Fair enough, there has been big interventions because of significant crises that needed to be done, but that's not a change, that's a sticking plaster, that's a backup plan in order to deal with fighting the fire because everything is on fire right at that moment, okay? It's dealing with the pandemic and the crisis. It doesn't change things, because as soon as that crisis is over, we go back to doing things exactly the way we were doing before. No change has occurred. And as horrendous as the pandemic has been over the last 2 years, I am sorry to be the bearer of horrific news, but it was the hors d'oeuvre before the main meal when we think about climate breakdown and the breakdown of the biosphere that is coming. And although we have coped with the pandemic and we have dealt with it, if we do not have things in place in order to prepare ahead of the consequences of climate breakdown, there is no dealing with it once it's happened, because the impact it will have will be devastating beyond even what we've just been through with the pandemic. So we need to be bold now, because cities are basically places where people live, and they are representative of people, and we have all sorts of mechanisms that hopefully support and make interventions. But we need to be bold in doing something at a city level and on multiple city and municipal levels that inspires the next level up and eventually the national level to change something, because we have proved it to them. And if we provide people with those opportunities and we allow them to come into a space where we co-create those solutions, the value that that will have will be huge. And all the other interventions that are currently being made will also all of a sudden have a magnified effect, because we will be able to follow through with them, and we will be able to build on top of those interventions rather than going background over and over again in just going back to the start, because we're trying to solve a problem in a way that just fixes it momentarily and never gives the opportunity for us to build and change things moving forward. And the fundamental reason why I believe that we need pilots, and it's wonderful to hear that we have the opportunity to do one of those, is because we're currently stuck in a debate around the costs. We're not talking about costs. We're talking about an investment. And when you make an investment, you need to know what you're going to get out of your investment. And the reason we need to pilot this is because we need to determine how different amounts invested into people's lives as that fundamental base layer make up for different lots of outputs. And once we've attributed a value to that, we can then have a debate around whether that value and those outputs are worth the cost or the price that is being spent. And then we can have an informed debate. But until that, it's pointless having a discussion about that money, because it doesn't mean anything. It's like me trying to sell you a car, and the only thing I will tell you about it is the price. You don't know how many seats it's got. You don't know how fast it goes. You don't know what color it is. You don't know how many miles to the gallon it's done. I don't know how many miles on the clock there are. I'll only tell you the price. You're never going to buy that car because it doesn't mean anything to you. If you know what it does, just in the way that you make any purchase or investment in your life, because you know what it will do and the effect it will have, then you start to think about how much am I willing to pay for that. And that's where we need to move the debate to in order to be able to do the pilots. We attribute a value, we can have an informed debate. So it's wonderful to hear that we are moving towards testing that factor.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for focusing on the human side, on the individual's care and individual's advancement as what leads to a societal advancement. It's really wonderful to hear that, to remember that we are all humans, well, at least we're trying to be, and this should be the primary focus when it comes to where you invest on a policy level or on any other level. So it's interesting also to hear you're being put on the spot for implementing a pilot now, but that's a happy outcome of this discussion. So maybe we should get straight to that. Before we move to the next round of reactions from one to another, I'd like to mention something that I've been noticing in the past decade or a bit more, and that is that and that stems from the fact that we humans are social animals, so we depend on community, developing a sense of community, being part of a community. And one change that I've noticed in the past decade or so was that what was already obvious, that we can form communities close to us on a local level, on a municipal level, on a regional level, if you will. That also has a reflection and a contradiction, perhaps, that the same thing seems to be happening on a global level now. And the local and the global level seem to have more importance now than the national level, which seemed to be quite prevalent for the last 150 years. In the past decade, we see the rise of the global being on a more or less equal footing as the local, given to the advances of communication technologies, as well as the global crisis that we're now called to face on mostly a local level. Global pandemics, the climate crisis, that comes after several years of globalizing our markets, as well as our communication technologies. So that's something I would like to see addressed from the speakers in whatever way you see fitting. But let's move to having reactions from one speaker to another. So I'd like to give the floor back to you, Mayor Daniilidis, to hear your reactions to the two sorts of insights that we heard from the other two speakers.
Και από την κυρία.
My comment is that we are only in the beginning of the road. I'm convinced that we will move towards this direction. I don't know how long it will take and how difficult this challenge will be. I think that the local administration, due to the vicinity, as mentioned by the representative of Barcelona, and due to the principle of vicinity, according to which these policies must be implemented by the local authorities in cooperation with the civil society as it is organized. And if civil society is not organized, it should be organized. So a big effort is being required. The political formations in the socialist, left and ecologist movements must share this, must embrace this policy and must introduce this into the parliaments, because it is not known, it is not well known. So this a proposal is not known to the citizens, and not only it is not known to the citizens who need such a policy, but I'm afraid that given that in the different consultations that we talked with many politicians, and when I mentioned that I will participate in this conference, most of them asked me, what exactly is this? What does it consist of? Therefore, an effort must be made, especially by the academia. And this initiative taken by the Pantheon University is very important in order to make this proposal known and to organize similar events in other places of the country. For example, I'd like to invite you in Thessaloniki to organize something similar. And of course, I don't know if you invited other mayors, because there are more than 70 mayors here in Attica, maybe mayors or vice mayors involved in social policy, so should also be invited here. And also in such discussions, maybe there should be representatives of the political parties and also representatives of the trade unions. And confederation of the workers. And also NGOs should also be invited who deal with such issues. So they should also participate in order to understand it and in order to start claiming it, because it is impossible to impose such a thing from the top to the bottom. The state would never impose such a thing. Therefore, of course, scientific justification is required to prove that this policy not only has a social and human benefits, but it also has a developmental impact as well, because I think that this framework should be accompanied by the social wage. So apart from the basic income, there should be also a set of public social services, which will also reduce the costs of the family budget. And this will help the vulnerable groups of people thanks to the basic income and the social wage. It will be able to have a better situation to improve. They will be able to improve their status. So we should leave behind the allowances, the allowance policy that drives citizens to marginalization and to social exclusion. And I'm talking about the social all these social types of allowances. And because we've seen that many times, so in many cases, we've seen that many often the people became very inactive and marginalized, people that were receiving allowances, and the assistance that this assistance provided to them was not helpful. All it did was to drive them to social exclusion instead of urging them to be trained and improve their status. You know, I'm dealing with social issues on a daily basis, and this is something that I experience very often. I think that the unconditional provision of allowances drives people to social conclusion, marginalization, and mental problems. So I'd like once again to thank you for inviting me. You justify once again that Pantheon University is really pioneer in these matters, and we're always at your disposal. Thank you.
Starting to wonder if presenting part of a package of social policies to municipalities would make it easier or more difficult for municipalities to accept the possibility of a pilot and maybe drive them closer to that. What will be your reactions? Let's continue with Angelina.
First of all, well, I wanted to ask about how the mayor would design that pilot. I mean, what would be the premises of it, like the real design, or some elements at least of that design. And I also wanted to comment on the fact that like we should spread the word within the trade unions and politicians and so on. Like I'm pretty sure that the universal basic income is like well-known social policy, both within the trade unions and politicians. Like actually, it's like the biggest, the big debate, how to save capitalism, right? The job guarantee or the universal basic income. But the problem is that there is a huge resistance. I don't think that within those groups in particular, it's not a well-known social policy or idea. It's that like both, like same as after, especially after the Second World War, social policies were tools to actually support the belief in endless growth and all the ideology of productivism. The same are the politicians for that. I mean, they are really like within this bubble. They can't go like, I don't know, imagine something different. So that the job is there. The job is to actually convince that we can use social policies, not just to save the system, because as always, it's its own tail. So in times of crisis, we need some other big social policy, as Jonny like mentioned, but convinced that the social policies can be used to envision an alternative, like a tool within the system for a different system. And yeah, I will come back to the question on the design, because this is crucial, because from the like that vision depends on the design.
Yes, I would say let's start with a direct reaction to that, and then we can continue to Jonny's comment.
Όταν λέω για την πιλωτική εφαρμογή, πρέπει να γίνει προετοιμασμένο.
When I talk about the pilot implementation, we need to do it in a prepared way. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. So when I say pilot implementation, when I talk about pilot implementation, what I mean is that it has to be done in a planned way based on a preliminary study in some municipalities of the country. So there must be the conditions, the necessary conditions must be met, because the implementation of this measure implies the existence of a whole network. I think that it is the local administration to implement that, such as all the allowances for the rents, all the other allowances are paid, provided by the municipalities. Therefore, it is necessary to record the population of a specific area, and the register record also the status of each family and each citizen. Then costing is necessary, securing the budget, of course, since we're talking about a quite important amount of money that must be available on a monthly basis. In our municipality, for example, we are 100,000 people, 32,000 households. So we need preparation before we implement such a policy. I don't know if in Spain, I don't know if this policy, this proposal about the basic income is known, but I can tell you that in Greece, not only the concept of the universal basic income is known, but it is not even known among representatives of institutions. I will not well, I think that out of 300 deputies of the parliament, I don't know how many are those who are aware of this concept. Not even 20%, I dare to say. So as out of the 300 municipalities, not even 10% are aware of this basic income. They do not have the knowledge. It's not that they reject it and they're against it, but they're not aware of the results that the basic income can bring about. As for the trade unions, okay, apart from some very few people that do follow, keep track of what is happening worldwide, and they read and look for information. So I think that apart from these very few people, the percentage of them who are aware of this concept and have and accept it and embrace it as a feasible policy are very, very few. So first of all, what we need to do is to inform as many people as possible. Then we need to make sure that they will embrace this vision, and we need to convince them that this is not just a vision. But if they think that this is something that is not feasible for the next 50 years, nobody will make the effort to promote it. But of course, this has to be across all these institutions and trade unions, etc., across the country. So an effort must also be made at a European level as well, because, for example, if the European deputies of the political parties, that is socialist, leftist, ecologist, Greens, etc., who do embrace such ideas. So then they can have launch a discussion, for example, at the European Parliament or at the level of European trade unions, or, for example, at the level of the European academia, in different circles, I mean. So, and of course, with the help of everyone, we can hope that this vision will become known and that this vision will be shared and then implementable, feasible. Ευχαριστώ. Johnny?
From mayors to civil society, to the society at large, when the vast majority of them are not even aware of the basic notion of unconditional basic income, how should we approach them in order to get the fastest way possible to a pilot on a municipal level?
It's a really good question. And the wonderful thing about the answer is that it's already happening. So obviously there's the UBI Europe network. They're doing lots of projects to engage people at all sorts of different levels of elected representation doing that. If we look west to the United States, there's a group of mayors there that are coming together to work on implementing pilot proposals that started barely 2-3 years ago. And there's probably 50, 60 pilots on all sorts of different scales happening in the US at the moment. And I think with all of this, we have to think of it on a timeline, but also on a scale. So we might want to get to 1,000-person study, a 10,000-person study, eventually a 100,000-person study. But that starts with a 25-person study. And maybe it isn't quite universal, but it is giving people a basic income. And it's not that that's the answer and that gets us the data we necessarily want, but it sets the precedent that gets us to the next step and the next step, the next step that gets us to where we want. And that's why we need people to stand up and convene, because there's a lot of work that we've done in the UK that stretches across all of those different strata and layers. So we have a similar group to the mayor group in the US that brings together local representatives, regional representatives, mayoral representatives, all the way up to parliamentary representatives, as a group of 250 people coming into a space to talk about what might be possible, how they might go about implementing it, how we can facilitate being potentially a group of people that has some knowledge, useful bits of information that they can then facilitate discussions with other people. Because to implement an idea en masse, regardless of what that idea is and that change, the tipping point is at about 16% of the population, whether that's the population of a country or the population of a community or the population of a group of people. So if 20% of the mayors in Greece are already aware and are on board, we're already past the tipping point. And we don't need everybody. If we had someone who was able to convene that 20% and get them in a room together, I'm sure that even in just this room, we could provide them with quite a lot of insight and education that would allow them to go out and have those conversations. And then if there's an invitation to wider political parties, trade unions, NGOs, other stakeholders that we want to get into a room, I don't think we need to be at a point of presenting them with a solution. We invite them into a space to co-create and have those discussions. And again, if we have people that are in a position to call those spaces together and invite those people into a room because of the status that they have or the networks that they're able to reach to, we start with a conversation and we build from there. And that conversation means that we are bringing stakeholders in, they get to co-create that situation, and we move forward quite rapidly into a position where we've got something where we can set the criteria and almost, from my world as a designer, write the design brief that gets the people and the academics required to turn it into that rigorous pilot study that gets the information required at that level. But we can start to co-create, we can start those conversations, and we can start to design what we're looking to get out of something by getting people in a room and starting to talk about what might be possible.
Yeah, that almost sounds like a conclusive statement as well as an invitation. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience and then wrap it up with closing remarks. We do have a question from the audience. Can we get a mic to Julio, please?
Thank you very much for your contributions. It was quite lovely. I have a question to the mayor. I just want to ask about what is the power or the physical space that the mayor has in Greece in order to implement policies such as a basic income. So, for example, what type of taxation powers does a municipality have? Or for example, for like local fees for the trash, things like this, or is that determined at the state level? And I'm just asking to, think about ways in which to anchor that basic income locally from a practical point of view, from a monetary point of view.
Όχι, ακόμα και να...
No, even if we had available resources, even if we had funds to cover the cost of such a policy, the legal framework governing the governance does not consider these expenses legal. So that is why I said that deputies and the local state, the central state, the political parties need to be informed. Of course, unless special funds are available for the implementation of this policy, even if the legal institution, for example, is modified, and if they tell us that, okay, we will modify the legal framework and we will give you the power to implement it, but but the resources are not available. So we need two things. First of all, the legal and institutional framework to allow us to implement such a policy, and of course, the allocation of resources. All these have to be implemented in a justified way in order to have, for example, to know, for example, that a municipality of, let's say, 100,000 people will need such amounts, etc. And of course, it's not only the money, we also need to have a set of services. In our municipalities, we do offer social services, but this is not the case in most municipalities, which either due to incapacity or for other reasons do not provide social services. Therefore, the basic income needs to be paid on a monthly basis, and of course, it should be accompanied by social welfare services. So I think that this will be a holistic approach that will make the implementation of the policy feasible.
I would like to add as a follow-up comment is that right now in South Korea and in Brazil, there are two regional governments that are implementing basic income pilots using complementary currencies that can only be used within the premises of the city. So that would be an alternative way to think about implementing a pilot. Maybe that's something to consider. I think we have one more question from the audience by Professor Demoulas.
Ευχαριστώ. Θα μιλήσω ελληνικά.
Speaking Greek. The question is for Angelina. The mayor mentioned the role of the services and said that, okay, with the basic income, the basic income must be accompanied by a set of measures. I was in Barcelona 3 years ago when the pilot was implemented, and it was implemented in combination with the services. That is, the basic income was provided, and at the same time, the social services were provided to the people, to the beneficiaries. So, do you think that this complementarity is necessary? In the case of Barcelona, with the basic income, not the guaranteed, but the basic income, do you think that this complementarity is necessary? And the question for John, the mayor spoke about the role of the municipality. He spoke about the citizens of the municipality, but all the pilots implemented refer to subgroups. So the universal is not universal, even in the pilots. In Helsinki, it applied to a small number of people. In Barcelona, it was implemented to 2,000 people. Out of the 2 million people living in the city of Barcelona. Only in Manitoba, it was applied many decades ago to the whole population. Therefore, how can we draw conclusions about the utility? So we need to have in mind an entity is a subgroup can be considered as an entity, as Julio, for example, said this morning about the case of Berlin. Well, in the case of Berlin, only part of Berlin was involved in the pilot.
Income as implemented in Barcelona 2 years ago,
Yeah,
there was social service also supporting the beneficiaries.
yeah, yeah.
I was there when it was implemented. I asked the social workers, do you afraid that you will lose your job if a basic income will implement it? Because the presupposition for a basic income is that if you have basic income, you are free, you can choose your work, you have motives to find the work you like. So you are not cheating the state because there is no means-tested benefit. It's not a means-tested benefit. So you have no reason to cheat the state. And even if you work in the black economy, you have no problem. You can refer it. When you get minimum income, you are afraid.
Like me personally, I think that there should be two things totally separated. From one point of view, we need like a stronger social network of support and stronger like better possibilities to count on different kinds of help. For example, in Poland, they implemented something what some people call like the universal basic income for kids, because it's for each kid. It's just 100 euros per kid, but of course it produces poverty and so on. And we have like some examples when someone, just because of receiving this money, like disappeared from the rather of the social workers, right? But this is like, in my opinion, like a separate thing. From one point of view, you like make stronger the presence, or not the presence in a controlling way, but the possibility to count on the support. But from the other point of view, you implement the universal basic income, but you don't link those things together, right? Because otherwise it's like normal traditional assistentialist policy with all this controlling character and stigmatization.
Cool, thank you. So I know you addressed your second question to me, but just to briefly touch on the first question about this idea of should we be testing things simultaneously? As a person that seeks to try and understand and work things out, whether that's the kind of engineer or scientist at heart, I think if you implement or do too many things at once, it's very hard to know what is causing what outcome. So I think it's a great idea that services should be tested and provisions being provided should be done as well. But I don't think one is needed before the other, and actually separating them and making sure you can measure the impacts of each of them is the key to it, because there's potentially impacts of each of them that you need to understand first, and then the impacts of the combination of those things and what those outcomes are, because there's always a multiplier effect in making interventions and changing things. And unless you can break it down to the point where you can understand each of those first, you'll never fully understand what you're changing and the effect it's having. So I think, yeah, separation and combination both need to be tested. In terms of the universality question and the scale of implementation, it's always a conundrum. And one of my other fascinations is not necessarily between whether I think something is a good or bad idea, is how you get from where we are to where we want to be. And actually, even if you can prove that universal basic income is like going to change the world in every positive way, and there's no shortcomings whatsoever, the implementation of how we get from where we are to that, where everybody has it, is the hardest bit, because nothing changes in that way and nothing changes at scale. It changes gradually in little bits of changes that eventually scales up to change. So one of the things that we look at in the lab network when we're making pilot proposals is, like I mentioned before, what is the timeline where we're scaling up from small to the kind of scale where we are getting useful information, but also looking at how we get to saturation scale. So what I mean by that is, if you can get 1,000 people together in one place, you might be able to see the combination macro effects that you would be able to make a reasonable set of assumptions on how a basic income could work at scale. Now, that might not conform to the normal rigorous academic way of selecting people at random, but actually you're choosing a geographic location in order to model the effects of how it would work at scale. And again, there's a gradual increase in that. You go from 25 people to 100 to 500 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. Or do you restrict it by time? So you say, well, what if we did 250,000 people, but we only did it for 6 months? Does that give us the scale that gives us another set of insights? And one of the really nice things that I learned recently about the Stockton pilot, which debunked a load of myths about what people might spend that money on and how it might facilitate, that was done in California, is they actually had a combination of both the academic and the anecdotal. So there was 100 people involved, there was 125 people involved in the study, 100 of which were being assessed against the criteria, weren't allowed to talk to the press, weren't allowed any other interventions so they could get the really rigorous data off it. And then there was 25 people who were allowed to talk about their experiences as they were ongoing, were allowed to kind of work with other people, talk to the media and stuff. So it's both the kind of story insight and that level of kind of, it's not as rigorous, but we're human beings and we can understand things on all sorts of different levels, and the more testable academic data. And I think the more we can combine those insights, the more reasonable the assumptions we can make and the more confidence we can have how that might scale up to making a big difference. But we will never be able to test at the scale that we will implement it at, because I'm not aware that that's how any policy is implemented, regardless of whether it's money or changes. And I know that certainly in the UK, every policy that has been done, they test it out with progressively bigger groups to see how it works and is implemented. And then they decide once it's above a certain threshold, it's worth doing nationally. But even then, the introduction of that is phased so that the departments and the people that are involved can be trained and organized, and all of the changes that can be implemented as they flow through the system.
Yeah, I can also reiterate on the examples of Brazil and South Korea that I briefly referenced, that they also started small and keep scaling step by step. So starting small is the way to go. We are slightly over time, so we need to wrap this up. And to do so, I will ask for one closing remark from each of our speakers, starting with the mayor.
Comment is that I'd like to express my thanks and the gratitude for participating in this conference. I think that we can be very hopeful about the future, even though we are in the beginning, at least in Greece. I don't know what the situation is in the other countries. So those of us who believe in the society of people, and those who believe in justice, and those who believe that this will bring about development, so if you manage through policies like this one to combat poverty and prevent social exclusion in this critical period, on the one hand, with the pandemic, the refugee crisis, and of course, the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, the leadership in Europe must realize that it must deepen things. In the last 20 years, all it did was to enlarge things in order to allow other countries in the European Union. So therefore, Europe should rather deepen than enlarge. So I think that we should try to convince Europe to promote economic and social unification, and of course to also promote common foreign policy and defense policy. If we did have such common policy, we wouldn't be so scared now with what is going on in Russia. So when the leadership, the EU leadership, manages to guide Europe to this direction and have a common European policies on different sectors, then we can definitely hope that very soon we will have at least on a pilot basis at a small population of the whole society to start implementing this progressive, radical policy on basic income. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm at your disposal in the future.
And my final remark or a comment would be that I think that after this conversation, the way of translating it into the language of practice would be, because like in Barcelona, they implemented the pilot program, but now on the Catalan level, they're implementing an important pilot program too. So I think it's just it's like an obvious next step to some interchange of practices with Neapolis. I mean, I can see a workshop interchanging the like the plans, the willness from the Greek side, and on all the knowledge and experience that in Catalonia can be already found. Thanks.
Yeah, huge thank you for the invitation to be part of the panel tonight, and thank you for the debate that we've had. Obviously, a big thank you to our audience, everybody in the room and those watching online. I really do hope that this is the start of a conversation and we can get some really good actions to follow up out of this and the ball rolling from what we've discussed today, so that we can convene that room of stakeholders and start those conversations that need to be had, and all the people that work within the networks that we're all a part of can be kind of provide that information and resource that's required to get those conversations going. And I started with a quote, so I'll finish with one, which is from Margaret Mead, which is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has."
Wonderful closing remarks. I don't think I have anything left to say. I would just like to thank Mayor Daniilidis, Angelina Kussy, and Jonny Douglas for being our guests today. I'd like to thank the Pantheon University for offering this wonderful space to have this beginning of a conversation like we all wish in common. And I'd like to thank very much the interpreters that have been working tirelessly for quite some time now. And last but not least, our audience, which will take this conversation into action. Thank you very much.